I would like to talk about the basics behind traumatic events. That's the main part, one of the main parts in our manual, explaining to the helpers, to you guys out in the field, what we are talking about and what you may see by when working with survivors. We have sent out some links, literature to with some short videos. Both are on YouTube. Maybe some of you had the time to follow these two small films. We just hop over today because maybe we have time to the first little movie afterwards. Okay? First, maybe some words about myself. I'm a psychiatrist. That means I'm a doctor and specialized in psychiatry. So I'm working in my daily life in an acute patient ward in a big outpatient clinic. And I'm working for several years with traumatized people from all over the world, refugees as well as Norwegian persons traumatized in their upbringing or by some other incidents. Sometimes also the life in Norway can be dangerous, but it's of course not in the same dimension that you are living just now in. So I would like today to present a brief introduction to trauma. The next slide is a little bit headlines about that. Judith Herman is an American psychologist who has studied lots of years since the 80s, traumatized persons, with focus on these surviving war and crimes. And she quoted, "A trauma is a personal encounter with death and violence." That means a traumatizing event needs in itself, it's an event where the person surviving it has the fear of death. These persons think they are dying just now. It's not just incident in the streets where you maybe get robbed by your handbag or purse. It's just things like earthquakes or fires or, of course, war and other things like that. So a traumatizing event is one that has the capacity to cause mental or physical damage. Sometimes people survive those incidents, but lots of them are getting traumatized, as we call that. And faced with such an event, you see the quote on the screen, the immediate response of the body and the mind is to struggle for survival. I come a little bit later back to the details of these words, because you see already here fight, flight, or freeze responses. We will explain that later on. Faced with such an event, it's like in the Stone Ages when a family has to flee from a saber tiger or a cavern bear. You had to survive, so either you fought for survival or you had run off. So the bodily responses are the same as 200,000 years ago. But we have now lots of different reasons to get traumatized. It's not only tigers anymore, but the bodily reaction is just the same as lots of 100,000 years ago. Now, please go to slide 7. Next one. We have special characteristics for to call an event traumatizing. As I mentioned before, it's not just a meeting in the street where you think your counterpart is just a little bit angry at you. The situation has to be overwhelming, inescapable, and very frightening. There are different and distinct criteria also the WHO organization has set up. It has to be an incident where the person is just frightened to death, more or less. The situation is characterized as well that you don't have control. You don't have control of the situation. You can't control what you are doing. You can't control what is done to you. And it's also a dimension humans in the daily life are not facing, as war atrocities you people might have encountered or are dealing with. So threatening of life and integrity is a very central point to be if a traumatic event has to be characterized as traumatic. Most people will struggle with serious reactions after such an incident. Lots of people maybe encounter these reactions just a few days. Some will suffer some weeks. Lots of them will suffer lots of months or maybe all the life. Now please go to slide 8. Gender-based violence and trauma. That's the main topic our whole manual is dealing with. Gender-based violence is someone has unmuted the phone, maybe? Okay, now it's go. Fine, thank you. Gender-based violence and trauma, it's a very distinctive form of trauma. The violation involved is very invasive and it's targeted to often women, but it can also target men. It's just gender-based, therefore we have this term. But the traumatic event, the traumatizing event also has to fulfill all the characteristics I mentioned before. These events have to be life-threatening, but often these gender-based violence traumatic events are very special in that way. They are often used in war context. They are often used to humiliate maybe women or men, sometimes also children. They are often used as a violent matter of humiliation and repression. So it's a very special kind of trauma and traumatic incidents we are talking about here. This gender-based violence against men, women, children, you name it, it's very often very personal when you are talking about traumatizing events otherwise. You also can become traumatized by a tsunami or a volcano or some other nature forces. But gender-based violence is always targeted against a person because she is a woman, she is a man or a child to get power about these people. So it's very personal, and almost all people which survive such trauma are traumatized and they are suffering very in the aftermath of this incident. Next slide, please. And by the way, just a remark, if I'm too fast in my explanations, so just give us a wink on the chat, so Christine will try to stop me and slow me down. Trauma reactions. Now I'm getting a little bit in the anatomy of human beings, or as well all mammals. It's the same also in the wild outside. If you take just a little rabbit or a little deer being hunted by a predator. So human brains are structured a little bit still in the same way. You see the schematic here. That's the brain. It's very schematic, but I hope you get an impression what I'm talking about. The thing down there, the green, the old brain, it's also called the reptile brain. This part of the brain is controlling the reflexes. In this part of the brain, it's controlled that you are breathing, that your heart is beating, that the basic things in your body are working. This part of the brain is also responsible for reflexes, for basic survival. It's just reacting. It's no conscious arguing with someone. It's no conscious thoughts about I have to flee, I have to fight. It's just a reflex. Just imagine you are standing beside a stove and it's very warm, and maybe you are leaning your hand on a hot plate It's too long if you just have to decide this stove is so hot, I'm burning my skin, I have to get my hand off this thing. If you are thinking in that way, your hand is already burned. You're just going the reflex way. Your hand is just acting, you are just acting reflexive, and the hand is going off the plate before you're getting burned. All these reflexes are centered in the old brain. So we are going a little bit up. You have the black part there. It's called the midbrain. The midbrain is in the midst of the brain. It's logic, and it's a part, it's called the amygdala. The amygdala is a kind of fireman in the brain system. It detects threats and separates important threats from less important threats. And you have as well a structure called the hippocampus there. It's responsible for building memories and sorting memories out. If you are surviving a life-threatening event, if you have time enough, so the hippocampus will sort it out if it's worth memorizing. You have the dark green part in the brain. It's the new brain. Here you have the consciousness of all our, what it's like to be conscious of, to think I'm going now down this street and I'm making a U-turn, or I'm going to the right. All these explicit things are consciously processed in the new brain. The normal process is that we are walking the street and we are meeting a friend, and it's a very conscious talking about the things happened the last days. So our brain is memorizing all this, and it's stored in a kind of inner shelf in a bookstore in your brain, and you have these memories and pictures available, and they are sorted. If something happens very fast and it's very life-threatening and endangers yourself, your existence, it's happening so fast that the new brain and sometimes also the midbrain, it's too fast to sort it out, to store it in your inner bookshelf, to have it available when you like it. Therefore, lots of people surviving life-threatening events, they don't remember everything which has happened. It's blurry, it's kind of, they don't remember, they are just filled with fear and they are afraid, but maybe they can't remember per detail what has happened. That's sometimes confusing for themselves, and it's also often a topic for discussion if they are interviewed by the police maybe, or some staff which would like to help them because they can't remember. And lots of parts in the world, also here, we often are meeting the question, but you have to remember it. It was so cruel, the things you are reporting, why don't you remember? And sometimes they are not trusted. Nobody believes them that these things had happened. So sometimes it can be quite difficult to get through with the point it had happened. In the same picture, you see an example, normal processing, the snake's image. It's written here. You see a snake, you see it consciously, and you consider, okay, that's a snake which is not poisonous, it's not biting, so you can just pass the snake. But maybe it's a poisonous snake. You just learn that snake is poisonous, or next time you see a snake, these pictures in the midbrain, in the amygdala, click in, and they provoke an immediate response to hop aside and to go around the snake, so yet that you have not to decide consciously this snake is poisonous or this snake is not poisonous, because these seconds to consciously decide poisonous or not poisonous, maybe they cost you your life. So you are just reacting, or the midbrain is just controlling these reactions. Okay. The points I'm making now by explaining the brain structure is just to get you to an understanding what reactions you will see in survivors, how you can react to these reactions. It's a kind of psychoeducation. It's a tool. If you know why these reactions are occurring, you can understand the survivors and you can help them better. Because lots of reactions, especially these reflex reactions, I'm coming to that topic a little bit later on, may be quite not understandable for people which not have survived and have not going through the same. They might not understand why the survivor is reacting weird, why the survivor is getting angry in a quite daily situation. And if you know, okay, something maybe in the brain is processed in a way that it's triggering these reactions, it's much better and much easier to understand the survivor and to help. Next. We have a short video which is demonstrating, I think, the same I tried to explain the last minutes. It's an explanation by an expert. He's also a psychiatrist, and it's called Dr. Dan Siegel. He is working in a big trauma clinic in the US. He's working lots of his time with traumatized children, and he has made lots of effort to, in a way, create a technique. Would you please mute your phone? Someone has on the microphone. Sherin? Okay. Thank you. Sorry. It's just lots of background noises if someone has the microphone on. Dan Siegel has created a very good picture of how the brain works and what's happening, because he had to teach these things also to some children affected by these reactions and also to the parents of these children. So we would like you to just watch this. It's a quite short video, just some minutes. Okay, I get the explanation that you have to click in the link. On the link you have got sent, so you have to open it by yourself. Just give us the feedback if it works, or maybe if you're standing still. We are getting the movie now here. Hi, folks, it's Doris again. 3 people, as far as we see it, have continued and finished the video. I hope everyone has completed. Otherwise, slide 11 in the Prezi, please. I want just get in some important aspects of trauma reactions. I mentioned before that they can behave a little bit strange, therefore also all the explanation of how the brain works and all these trauma reactions and where in the brain which things are processed. A survivor of a traumatic event, as you can read on the screen, experiencing something similar can also behave differently. And events associated with trauma reactions are often very intense and very serious, very heavy. And all the reactions, I think that's something I cannot stress enough. All reactions you will see in survivors are survival responses. All reactions we see are normal reactions to something just abnormal, to some catastrophe you are not facing every day, luckily. Everything you see, you will see, you will experience is a survival reaction 200,000 years ago, as I mentioned, when you are fleeing from a saber tiger or something like that. So it's in the beginning a reaction which is quite okay, to just get away from the soldier or from the volcano or from the rapist, or you name it, all these things setting you in danger. All these reactions in the beginning are meant to help you out of the danger. Traumatic events otherwise affects people in different ways, also in the longer term. So every single person is unique. There are some similarities I'm coming back to soon, but every person reacts unique. Some have some days or some weeks suffering with these symptoms. Sometimes they will show symptoms several months after the incident. Next slide, please. We would like to challenge you a little bit with your comments and your thoughts. What makes an event traumatic? And maybe it would be very okay if you could reflect in your society, in your surroundings, at your workplace, at your private place, at home. What would we consider a traumatic event? Do you have examples? Do you have by yourself witnessed something? So just write us some comments in the chat and we will try to answer. So I think we give you some minutes, so we take it continuously. Okay. Yeah. Ja. Immunisten. Ja. Ja. Yeah. I'm online again, thank you. We have a little bit technical problems because I have to be on the screen and at the same time I have to read the comments. Am I? Okay. Someone told us war itself for Syrian, and I think that's quite right. I'm also working with lots of refugees, and war itself is a traumatic event. Just that I think war is just an epic dimension and just so atrocity scale. You have lots of small traumatizing events within a war itself. Lots of refugees are living under circumstances life-threatening every day. So war is one of the worst cases of a traumatizing and examples of a traumatizing event. Yeah. Yeah. We also get the hint if you maybe are concerned for one person in the surroundings and you have a humanitarian worker having to take care of this person, and in the surroundings and the family members are armed and in uniforms. So it could be traumatizing for this person of concern as well as for the humanitarian worker. And that's a point we also have stressed a little bit in our manual, that not only the persons surviving this war, for example, are traumatized, but lots of the humanitarian workers as well. Yeah, violence of police against protesters, right? It's not necessarily the case that you are to be beaten by yourself, by the police, or tortured in some prison. It's enough, to put it in that way, witnessing these atrocities. To witness other people beaten up or being shot dead is enough to be qualified as a traumatizing event, of course. Yeah, being caught in the middle of clashes, of course, if you are in an area where people are beaten, or just a demonstration against something, the police is coming, or maybe the soldiers, and you are not personally targeted maybe in the beginning, but all the people are targeted as well. So of course, that's right. Yeah. It's also mentioned if you are losing someone, some beloved family members, of course, loss of beloved ones. Sometimes people are dying by old age, of course, but in war and crime and violence zones, often people are dying violently, being shot, getting in prison. To know that these people have died under such circumstances is traumatizing. Losing some body parts also is traumatizing, because then I imagine at the same time a situation where you are under life-threatening circumstances. So maybe you just lost your leg, but maybe you should have been shot. So it's double up, to put it that way. Sexual abuse, of course, that's into the gender-based violence area I've been talking about a little bit earlier. That is violence, especially because you are a sexual person, to put it that way. It's lots of demonstrating of power. And often these are the women suffering most, but of course also men are a target of these. Often men are target of sexual violence in prisons as a mean of torture. Pointing to prison gunners. Yeah. It's also right topic coming up here, threats to be shot, that you are threatened to be shot or to be harmed, that you have arms pointed at yourself, of course. The common of all these examples you gave us is that you are in a situation where you think maybe you are going to die now. It's rustling to your own existence, and it's setting a question mark to your own existence. So it's very, very existential. Okay. Yeah. It can also be traumatizing if you don't know if you are safe or secure. And I think that is also the case, and in a special way, very dangerous in a war zone, as lots of you are obviously at the moment, if you are not secure. If you are living in a situation where you don't have a shelter, where you don't have a roof over your head maybe, or maybe you have a house but you don't know when the police is coming again, or maybe the soldiers are coming the next week or in 1 hour, you are under continuously threatening of your life and your integrity. And in these conditions, it's very, very difficult to stay stable, of course. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I suggest that we go further on with our Prezi. Thank you all for your reflections so far. You will get the opportunity to come with more remarks a little bit further on in this session. We are going to slide number 13 and 14, trauma reactions. Here I'm coming back to some points I have already explained a little bit earlier in this session. Human beings and also animals have very early in the 200,000 years ago developed an alarm system helping them to survive. And these are physically responses to danger. They were very okay 200,000 years ago. They are also still okay nowadays, but sometimes they are not so adapting anymore because lots of people are a little bit stuck in these reactions, and I will explain it a little bit furthermore. These are responses below our consciousness. I explained it before. It's controlled of a part in the brain, the midbrain, called the amygdala, and there the responses to danger are occurring without that you are consciously can decide that you will act this way or that way. Responses as reflex are just a bit of a second, while consciously things, if you are just deciding consciously that you want to walk to the right side or to the left side, it takes much longer time. Next slide, please. Now we are getting in some topics maybe some of you have heard about before, physical responses, survival strategies, and this is the very famous fight, flight, freeze, the 3 Fs, and there's some fourth point, it's playing dead. I would like to explain it to you because it's very important and it's explaining lots of reactions you will see in the survivors you will meet and you try to assist. If you are meeting a saber tiger or some soldiers or some police and you are threatened for life, you are endangered, so you try first to get away, to escape. And this is the, I'm just turning the things, it's point 2, it's a flight. You try to escape and you try to run. Or you have the chance, and it's a little bit difficult to decide whether fight or flight is the first mode to get into, because some people, there are studies about that, some people tend to flee first and some people tend to fight first. It's nothing better or worse with that, it's just a matter of maybe some genetics. Flight, you try to escape. And you don't plan to run. I have worked with clients who were telling me they tried to escape from some policemen and they didn't consciously start to run away. They just suddenly saw themselves that they were running. Something in them started to run, they described to me. And fight, you try to fight the enemy. It's quite useless very often if you are facing a crowd of maybe violent other people trying to get you, so you will flee. The first thing you can try to come out of the situation. Fight to flight is also quite important because all the energy the body has is being sent into the muscles, the heart is beating faster, you are breathing much more heavily and you're breathing much more faster, the muscles get more blood, all the digestive processes in the body, for example, are slowing down. It's not necessary to digest your breakfast if you have to flee. And also all the conscious processes in the brain are just slowed down. It's just survival. The third point is freeze. Something in you, some reflex decision has been made. Flight and fight are no good options. The energy levels are very intense. Your body is just still, lots of blood is going to the muscles and your heart is beating still fast, but you are in a way immobilized. You will see it in the animal kingdom sometimes. There are some animals, opossums for example, there are some strange animals, they are stinking already when they are living and going around, and if they are frightened, they just collapse. They are lying on the ground, the heartbeat is going down. Every predator will think this little animal is dead already, and predators normally don't eat dead meat, so the predators will go away, and after half an hour about, this little opossum will get on the feet again and will go its way, and it has survived. This reflex is a reflex to survive, showing all the predators that you are quite uninteresting to eat. You are not good to eat. Also with human beings, this reaction is seen very often, this freeze, that you are struck by anxiety, that you can't move, that you are immobilized. And it's a shock tilstand, a shock situation, you can't control that, it just happens. Playing dead, it's a little bit difficult to distinct it from freeze for some people. Playing dead, you can walk, you can move, but you are also in a kind of foggy state of mind. You can't decide consciously what you are doing and what you're not doing. Playing dead is very often a kind of submission thing. For example, I talked to refugees surviving some prison weeks, and they submitted in the end sometimes to sexual assaults or torture things without screaming anymore, without fighting anymore, just let it happening in the reflex thinking, make it go away. I will just survive and just go on with that. It's not immobilized, but it's also a foggy state of mind. You can't control these reactions, they just happen. Okay? If it's too fast in the explanations or maybe not understandable enough, just give us a wink. Slide 16. Here we just want to challenge you once again. As it's written on the slide, please write your comments in the chat, and we would like to ask you if you recognize these responses in survivors you have met before, you are working with, you have seen. Do you have seen some fight reactions or flight reactions, or someone who has been frozen in time? Just get some remarks or suggestions in the chat, so we will discuss it. Okay? There's a comment about a freeze reaction after sexual harassment, and that's quite logical. Yeah. So, verbal harassment, sorry. So that's also okay, and we see it very often that you're getting in a state of freeze, you can't do anything. Sorry, someone has on this mic. It's quite a lot of background noise. I don't know who it is. Okay, thank you. So freeze is also seen often in our society. It has not to be a trauma reaction. You see also slightly signs of that if you're just yelled at, for instance. If you are yelled at and maybe it's not fair that you are yelled at, maybe you will also see at with yourself that you're going in kind of freeze. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. There's mentioned a flight reaction after injuries, and a freeze reaction would maybe cost the life of this person. That's a quite interesting comment, because we talked about just here in the post that I have to stress a little bit the distinction. It's not a conscious move to decide whether you are fleeing or fighting or freezing. It's just kind of the person, and it's not predictable how you are reacting. And so in the aftermath of such a atrocity or a raid or something like that, you can of course conclude this person died because it was a freeze reaction and she or he got caught by the police, and the other had a flight reaction and got away. And that's true, but it's a pity it's not possible to control these reactions. It's just happening, and it's a individual trait, to put it that way. You can't control that. Yeah. Some more comments? No. Okay. I suggest we go further on. We go to 17 and 18. This is quite important because I would like to talk about triggers. I think everyone maybe has heard this word before. A trigger is something which gets the pictures of the traumatic event, of the traumatizing event, up to the consciousness again. Triggers, trauma reminders, and flashbacks is the headline of this slide. And they are extremely stressing and causing extreme anxiety and panic. And the survivor could be afraid of going out or meeting people just because she or he is so afraid to meet these triggers, to get all the pictures up again. So maybe this person traumatized would isolate him or herself in the flat or in the tent or wherever she or he might be, just because they are so afraid to go out, and everything is remembering them, is reminding them on things that had happened. Next slide. Triggers and trauma reminders. It's a little bit the same and more in detail as I mentioned it before. Trauma reminders are events or situations reminding the survivor of the things which had happened. That could be situations similar to the one they had survived. That could be persons similar to the persons they have seen. That could be voices or smells or sounds. And these trauma reminders are called for triggers. These triggers are, it's for the survivor, it's as if it's happening again. And that's very, very important to get it further on and to get it with, because all these survivors reliving these triggers are awakening trauma memories again, and they are reliving it over and over again, and they are scared to death as they have been when it happened. So it's quite important to have that in mind. Okay. Here we tried to explain a little bit more what triggers or trauma reminders are. There can be lots of different things. For example, I have worked with trauma survivors which reacted at some voices because these voices reminded them of a soldier assaulting them 2 years ago. So this voice, it was not the soldier itself, but it was similar. So this voice brought back pictures from the traumatizing event. And you find it in slide 20, the second sentence with flashbacks. These pictures coming up again are called for flashbacks. These are sudden, strong re-experiences of a past traumatic events. Often they are pictures of things. It's lots of trauma survivors have told me it's like to be in a movie. They are seeing this film over and over again of to be tortured or being in an earthquake and their houses are falling apart, or maybe they are beaten up again. It's like a movie, but the horrible thing with this movie is they don't have the stop button. They can't stop it. And that's the involuntarily thing about that. Flashbacks, you can't stop flashbacks. They are just happening, and they are triggered by things reminding the survivor of something. And as I mentioned before, that can be lots of things. Sometimes these flashbacks are coming as rain from blue sky, you don't know. Often they are triggered by some things happening. If you have these sensations in the night, we call it nightmares. Nightmares are, as flashbacks, called with a common word, intrusions. You have the flashbacks in the daylight and you have the nightmares by night. Lots of survivors are awakening lots of times, many times in night by nightmares. These triggers, they are triggering, of course, trauma pictures. They are triggering nightmares and flashbacks. And again, very important, the body of the survivor reacts as if all this is happening again. So you have again, blood pressure is going up, the pulse rate is raising, all the muscles get lots of blood to flee from the danger or to fight. All the responses are natural ones in the point of start, point of origin, but it is as if it's happening again. We have some reflections. One question we would like to ask: how can the survivor avoid triggers and how to regulate or control them when they appear? And I think it was a question we sent out before. We got some answers, but we would like to get some of you guys now to send us some questions. And I think maybe next time we would take this sentence a little bit different. Is it correct to avoid the triggers? Or maybe are there some points where you have to face your nightmares? Maybe you have some reflections about that also. Feel free to chat now, you get sometimes. Back on air. We are seeing that there are no comments online now, and we are just... Oh, there's one. Yeah. The survivor should accept that they can be with a helper to face their fears in baby steps way. Must be when the survivor is ready. Right. That is a quite wise comment, because you see the survivor, you joining the survivor on the way, and baby steps are very okay, but I think the topic also here, the point is avoiding triggers is not always the solution. Lots of times you just start by teaching them to avoid. That means that they learn what kind of things in the daily life is triggering them. So that's a good point of start. That you're working with the survivor and you're just exploring the surroundings and you're finding out what is dangerous, what is causing that they are reliving the trauma again. But if you, in the last consequence, always try to avoid triggers, so maybe you get a survivor which is isolating himself or herself just all the day around in the flat, and they are quite immobilized, also with fear, and they try to avoid everything, remembering everything, reminding them on the trauma. So if you have that point of work, then it's quite okay to start baby steps. Thanks for the topic, it's quite good. Yeah, baby steps just to learn the survivor to regulate and control the triggers when they appear. Yeah. I think the topic now, it's better to cope and to build the resilience. It's quite right. You have first to target the triggers. You have to work with the survivor when nightmares or flashbacks are coming up. And then you have to go with baby steps to step 2 or 3 or 4, and you have to work with them how to control and to regulate. And then it's quite okay if you, as a helper, remember a little bit of this anatomy stuff I talked about half an hour ago, because then you can explain to the survivor, you have a quite normal reaction to an atrocity which has happened. It's quite a normal reaction. It's working that and that and that way. And then you can teach them how to cope with that. Yeah. It has been risen the question, maybe it's challenging for human aid workers or humanitarian workers if they are not educated as a psychologist, how to struggle, how to cope with the survivors and their reactions. But I think you haven't to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I think if you have these basic topics we have talked about the last 2 sessions and today, I think one is quite capable to comfort the survivor and just teach a little bit basic knowledge, again, not to stress less. These all are quite human, normal reactions to quite unnormal catastrophes. We will give otherwise also more tools how to cope with these survival reactions next time in the next session. So you will get a toolbox you can use further on in your work with the survivors. But I think you haven't to be afraid to work with survivors even if you are not a psychologist or psychiatrist. It's quite fine to teach them all these basic stuff just to get a basic knowledge and understanding of how things are connected. So it's lots of things are done with that already. Okay. If there are no more comments, so we will go further on. Slide 21. Here we would like, if you feel good for that discussion, some examples from Syria. I think these are quite interesting questions because I talked about that trauma challenging reactions or situations are all over the world. They have lots of things in common. Maybe you think something in Syria and the Syrian conflict is specific. So we would like to get your opinion about that. So typical survival strategies maybe survivors use to overcome some things you have by yourself seen in working with survivors. Okay, we're waiting for some comments if you have some. Yes? We have just thought about if you think these questions, are very, very big questions and you would like to comment that because it's a little bit difficult just to write some sentences. So one by one you can also unmute your mic and just talk to us, but then it would be very okay, just one at a time, otherwise it would be very big. Yeah, yeah. So check in with the chat if you would like to tell us about some story you know about. So we will try to control and to arrange that. Thanks. We have got one example of a man who burned himself to death for the hardship of providing his children the essential things they had to have. So it's of course a good example, if I can call it a good example in that context. how it works very often in war situations, that you just have all these war crimes around you, but you have also hunger, and you have no water, and you have no food supplies, and there are lots of families struggling very with that. Unmute. We got some examples as well of, for example, of a girl getting to complete strangers because their parents threatened her to death because she has been raped. I think it may be typically for war-torn countries. It may not be typically, and I think that's very, very sad to say, it may not be typically Syria. I think it's typically for lots of communities which are war-torn, that you have also conflicts in a family. To be raped and to have survived torture and gender-based violence is often a very big cause of shame. We have also some comments about that in the manual, because it's a very difficult thing everywhere in the world to be tortured, to be raped, but some communities are even more mad about that, to put it that way. And they also, the example of the butterfly woman, maybe you have hopefully read about the manual. It's a little bit the same in Africa. A woman has been raped and she is thrown out of the village and no one will talk to her, and it's a big shame also for the family that these things are happening. So I think these cases are very cruel, and you have to handle it very carefully, double up, because you, on the one side, you have to help the survivor. You have to get him or her into therapy, or at least into talking to some people about the things happened. But you also have parallel to work with the community. The butterfly woman in our manual is stabilized in the end, and then a process in the community is to be started, that you have to go in discussion with the community whether the community is able to take her back. And that's of course also an issue if a family is very upset and very not understandable for that. So these people they don't have anyone to turn to. It's very tragic. Yeah. 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 And as I see in the example you sent us, so this girl I mentioned in the start, she got help and survived, and that's very, very good to hear. Not everyone is so lucky, but I think that's also a very good point to stress a little bit thoughts about what you as a helper can do. It's not just helping the survivor, it's also maybe go out in the community and raise understanding for these things, that it's not the fault of the woman which has been raped, who has been raped. It's on a quite other level. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Some children escape from home and prefer to stay in the street. Violence and poverty or sexual abuse at home. It's a little bit on the same level. It's violence at home. Maybe it's exaggerated by war situations in Syria and other countries, but we have lots of poor countries around the world where it's not a very good upraising of the children, and lots of children in other countries are living on the street because it's domestic violence and maybe alcohol or drug abuse by the parents. So these kids prefer to live in the street, and I think it's quite tragic to hear that. So it's a big, big, big problem. You have to get, you have to take care of these kids, and you idealistically seen, you have to fix these families, and it's quite a challenge. Okay. I suggest we can go further on if it's no... Oh, sorry. There's one comment more. When women start to depend on herself, especially after losing husband, brother or father. That might be in the beginning not be so well, because all these development is starting by losing some beloved family member. But sometimes women in times of war are getting more self-sufficient, more self-consciousness. There are lots of communities where women are not seen as equal as men, and in these situations they have to survive, they have to look out for themselves. Sometimes also these women struggle afterwards to cope with the community they are coming from, because in the meantime they have learned to stand on their own feet, to put it that way. So it's not so easy to blend in a, let me say, traditional community afterwards again. It's a challenge. Okay, thank you for your comments so far. I suggest we're going further on, and I see we are just ending the session with that. Shall we get the little movie we talked about in the beginning? I would like, we have a little bit time. You have been sent a link, and it's a little YouTube movie. We have mentioned already on the third slide, you got literature to prepare. It's called Trauma and the Brain, and it's a little, yeah, it's a comic. It's not a comic. It's a little movie about 7-8 minutes long, and I think it's quite okay because it summarizes lots of things I've talked about. And we would like, before we open for some more questions to end the session completely, we would like to invite you to get your YouTube link open and to watch this little YouTube. Christine just sent the link, and as she is writing now, when you have problems, just let us know, and we would like to get a feedback when you have finished with the YouTube. I think it's about 7-8 minutes. See you back soon. Hi, Fokens. We have seen also the little movie here, so we think that you have finished the movie, and I see lots of okays are ticking in. What do you think about the movie? And otherwise, as Christine wrote, we are opening up for questions. So just get on with all things you have to ask and to comment about the session of the day. Mm. 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 Yeah. If you would like, if someone has a question which should get directly to us, not recorded, so feel free to and tell us. Mm. No question at all. Confused about how to apply a metaphor method. Could you specify that a little bit? I assume that it's maybe difficult to introduce a metaphor to explain it to the survivors. When you're meeting a survivor, then it's quite okay to explain all these trauma reactions. A survivor will show anger or anxiety, or maybe is stressed or just frustrated or angry. So it's quite okay to can tell the survivor all these are normal reactions. And then you can use the butterfly history, the butterfly woman of the manual as a metaphor. A metaphor means that you are telling the survivor maybe this story. It's kind of a fairy tale. It's a sad fairy tale, but it's a fairy tale. You would like to introduce you with all the complex PTSD. Okay, it's another question. I think I would like first to answer the metaphor question. You can use a metaphor anyhow in the treatment, in the meeting with the survivor, by telling them a story. Just begin to tell them, I would like to tell you a story of the butterfly woman. And then you're telling this story, and I hope you have read the manual. So the butterfly woman goes through all these stages of first experiencing a traumatizing event. She's getting raped by some soldiers. So how she's struggling, all the bodily symptoms she shows, all the rage she has, and how she is getting to be stabilized after all. So this metaphor makes the survivor understand these reactions much better. You can say, this woman survived and she felt so. You survivor, what do you think? Do you feel the same? So it's a metaphor. It's for lots of people more friendly to tell this story and not to ask directly the survivor, do you feel this, do you feel that? You can do that as well, but often it's also shame. They don't want to talk about directly, but when they are hearing a story similar to their own story, lots of people understand much better what's going on. In session 5, we will also talk a little bit about this, how to use a metaphor and how to use the story. We got another question or remark, intense anger feeling and complex PTSD. Complex PTSD is a complex topic. I don't know whether every one of you is comfortably with this term. Complex PTSD means that people have survived atrocities. They are very traumatized. Sometimes they don't have flashbacks of single situations. They are just angry, anxious, activated, overreacting. And I think all those things you can do, just use the metaphor and this fairy tale, to put it that way, this sad fairy tale with a quite okay ending. But the best is psychoeducation, just to calm the people down first. And I think next time in session 4 we will talk about stabilizing and grounding techniques, because you have to calm down a survivor first before you talk about things which have happened, before you open up for questioning. So you have to get some things in your toolbox. And I hope that you will join us all for the next session, where we are talking about just that, grounding exercises. You can breathe together with the survivor, you can count, you can ground, you can teach them to put their feet on the ground, to focus on the here and now. And when they are more calm and not so angry anymore, then maybe you can open up for what had happened. Do you want to talk to me about that? And lots of things. Complex PTSD as a treatment, I think I would not suggest to target kind of treatment of complex PTSD out in the field. I think there it's first priority to calm the people down, to get them back in the here and now. more questions or reflections? Okay. We all here would thank you for your patience. It was a heavy topic today. It was lots of teaching. I hope most of the points I have made were understandable and I got it in the right way, that you got a hunch about what we are talking about. We are back in 1 week, next Wednesday, where we will join, I hope all of you will join us, to session 4, and we will talk about stabilization and grounding techniques to fill up your toolbox a little bit, that you can help all the survivors you're meeting and you're working with even better. Thank you for participating. Have a good day and take care, everyone out there. We will be back in 1 week. Bye-bye.